All right, everybody, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's panel about the Peace Corps, and particularly hearing some stories from some return volunteers who are also Sacred Heart alumni. This is a pretty unique experience and a way for you to learn more about Peace Corps, but also hear some stories from folks who have, had a similar life path as yourself and have come out the other side better and stronger. So thank you for taking some time to join us this morning. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Kunkel. My preferred pronouns are he and him. I'm your local Peace Corps recruiter. I'm based in New York City, but I get to Connecticut all the time. And normally I would be able to come on campus and join you at Sacred Heart. But today is the day that we're doing the Zoom call. So I appreciate you joining us for that. I also served as a Peace Corps volunteer. I served in Madagascar as an English teacher, and I was able to work in a lot of other different programs and create some projects in the community where I was living as well. I'm very, very grateful for my service. That picture there is one of my favorite from my service, and I think really kind of encapsulates a lot of what the Peace Corps ideals and experiences can be. It's a photo of me standing next to my very, very good friend and work partner. His name is Johnny, all in the yellow there. Johnny's standing next to his wife, who's standing next to Johnny's mother-in-law, holding their firstborn, first son. He's only a couple months old in that picture. But for me, Johnny was somebody that I met when I first came into the community in Madagascar. He was an English student that had just graduated high school. And then we started working really closely together on a few different projects. He was great in our English library in the community where I lived. So we formed a really close professional relationship, but also really bonded as friends. And I consider him my brother, and I still talk to him often through Facebook and still connected. But for me, every time I think about my service and I think about this picture in particular, it brings a smile to my face thinking about the friendships and the relationships and kind of that person-to-person, interaction that Peace Corps volunteers are making on an individual basis all over the world and have been for almost 60 years now, which is pretty incredible. So that's a little bit about my service, and I'm happy to be able to share it with you all. For those of you who might not be as familiar with Peace Corps, that's great. I'm glad you're here. We are essentially, an agency that was designed to allow American citizens to live and work abroad and really participate in grassroots community development projects. And we were founded in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy. And at that time, President Kennedy and Sergeant Shriver established the mission and the goals of Peace Corps that you see here, and they have not changed since 1961. And I think that's pretty important. It shows our commitment to this work and our commitment to this consistency, but also the fact that these goals are still needed now, arguably maybe more so in some areas, continuing since they were in 1961. And as lofty as it might sound, the mission of Peace Corps is to promote world peace and friendship. We do that through these three goals that you see here. The first goal is sort of about all that work experience that you have, the actual, working on projects in the community, that hands-on aspect of Peace Corps. I think it's also really important to highlight here this phrase, interested countries, and to remember that Peace Corps is only serving in countries that have invited us to come and serve with them. And so we have that partnership, and that's a really important aspect of the work that we're doing. And the second goal you see here is to help promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served. That's you as a volunteer sharing your American experience, your background, your cultural identity, representing the rich diversity of America. We're going to hear a lot more about that today from our panelists, which is pretty exciting. And the third goal of Peace Corps is kind of the flip side of that, is kind of representing and promoting a better understanding of other people on the part of Americans. And we're also going to get a lot of that today from not only myself, but our other return volunteers who are going to be sharing about their own experience and the culture and the countries where they served. But this is a big part of what Peace Corps is. I think it's really important to remember that 2/3 of these goals, these last two, you don't need a special degree, you don't need a lot of professional experience. You just kind of need to be a nice person and willing to learn and willing to exchange about yourself. And right there, you can fulfill 2/3 of the goals of Peace Corps. which is pretty incredible. So that's something I want to leave you with as well. Now let's talk a little bit about where we're serving and what we're doing. So here, I know this map is maybe a little hard to read each individual country name, but hopefully the visual gives you an idea of the 60+ countries where we had programs up until March of this year. Obviously, COVID-19 has affected our agency just like it's affected everybody else. So at that time in March, we made the really difficult decision to temporarily suspend all of our programs and bring home all of our volunteers that were in the field. And once we safely did that, we turned right back around and started looking at how we could re-enter programs and how we could restart projects in all of these countries. We have every intention to be able to go back to all of these countries, but that's going to happen, slowly and carefully as we look at the health and safety situation in each country and work with our local partners. So the timing of that is going to be a little bit different depending on the country. But we're pretty confident that we're able to start and bring some volunteers back to some countries even as early as January, February, March of 2021. So we're on this beginning wave of coming back and returning to countries, which is really exciting. But for the purposes of today, I just want you to know we've got programs and we have intentions of continuing to serve in all of these wonderful countries that you see here. Now, in terms of what Peace Corps volunteers are actually doing, you'll hear, again, a lot from other return volunteers today about what their projects are, but every Peace Corps volunteer has what we call a primary assignment, and that would fall under one of the 6 categories that you see on your screen here. So depending on your academic background, your professional background, your personal interests, that can help guide you in a direction to find a program that might be a good fit for you. But ultimately, we have a lot of generalist positions. So, lots of folks that come from lots of different backgrounds can still find a good fit within Peace Corps as well. So your primary assignment here, this is what you're spending the bulk of your time on while you're in the community and serving. In addition to that, you have the option and you're encouraged to create what we call secondary projects. And that's really meant to marry your background and your skills and your interests with what the community needs and what their resources are. So you can be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more creative with some of these secondary projects. Again, I'll leave it to our panelists to talk a little bit more about their own primary assignments and their own secondary projects to hopefully give you some more context and some more understanding of what that is going to be like. But that's essentially the work side of Peace Corps. I want to talk a little bit about some benefits both during and after your service, and then I promise we will get to our panelists, because it's really important to recognize that Peace Corps, as a federal agency, we're able to provide a lot of these great benefits that will support you both during and after your service. Chiefly, we've got a living stipend for every volunteer that covers their housing, their food, their transportation, any other basic incidentals that they might need while they're in service. You've got full medical and dental coverage provided by Peace Corps. We've got dedicated doctors and nurses in each country that are only working with Peace Corps volunteers. They're basically your on-call 24/7 medical staff, so they'll handle your routine care all the way up to any emergency care if you need it. If you've got student loans, we've got options for you depending on the student loan, the type, and the service provider. We've got some different routes that we can go on, so I won't get into too many details right now. Happy to have conversations later on, but we definitely have some benefits there you can take advantage of. Vacation time and traveling is really important. You're not just doing Peace Corps just to work and to be in the community. You're also going to be in a country and likely a part of the world that maybe you've never been to or haven't had a chance to explore a lot. So we want you to be able to take in that, and so we provide those vacation days for all of our volunteers. So that's something that you definitely want to keep in mind. And this is on top of all the great career and training and professional skills that you're going to get, not only in the subject area that you're doing your primary work, but a lot of the intangible skills that are really good for pretty much any sort of industry and any job. I'm talking flexibility, resourcefulness, independence, cultural adaptability. These are all things that you are going to get in spades as a Peace Corps volunteer. So that's really during your service, and then after your service, the benefits don't stop there. We keep giving you benefits, which is really nice. So every volunteer at the end of their 2 years of service gets about $10,000 in what we call transition funds. It's really designed to help you readjust to life after service, and it's your money to use however you want. So whether you want to continue traveling for a little bit after your service, if you want to start paying back some of your student loans, or if you want to start paying rent on an apartment and getting ready for that job search, again, this is a nice financial cushion for you to come back to and know that you're going to be taken care of for a little bit with that funds. We've got some graduate school benefits as well, which I know some of our panelists will talk about. If you've been thinking about graduate school, even remotely, definitely encourage you to look into this. We've got partnerships with over 100 different universities across the nation. And for them to participate in our fellowship programs, they're committing to providing at least 25% tuition reduction to all of our return volunteers. A lot of schools, depending on their financial ability, can go above and beyond that. Maybe they'll give you a full ride and benefits. It really depends on the program and the institution, but a minimum 25% off of a graduate degree is still a pretty fantastic deal. So definitely happy to dive into that a little bit later on if you've got questions. Also want to highlight our federal employment advantages. I took advantage of this and some of our panelists did as well. But all of our return volunteers get a special federal hiring status for up to a year after you finish your service. So it is a little bit of a use it or lose it kind of situation. But again, without getting too far into the details, happy to have those conversations later on. It essentially makes it easier for you to get into the federal government in any agency, almost any job. So if you want to start working in the government, get a little bit of experience, explore an area that you're maybe interested in, this could be a really great benefit that you could use to leverage your Peace Corps service into your next career move. So definitely think about that. And there's a whole host of other alumni networks and connections and professional development benefits that you get after your service as well. So the bottom line is there's a lot going on here. We give a lot to our volunteers because they're doing a lot for us and for our country as well. So we want to treat them well. Without further ado, I've blabbered on for long enough. You're not here for me. You're here to hear from our panelists and to learn more about their experience. So we've got 3 wonderful panelists that have joined us today. We'll introduce them one at a time, and I'll ask them to talk a little bit about their service. And we've also got some photos from their service that I'll ask them to run through as well. So gentlemen, if we could, kind of get into that, talk us through where you served, what you were doing, walk us through some of your photos that we've got on these slides, and tell us a little bit about what or who had inspired you to actually join Peace Corps and start down this path. So we'll start first with Addison. Addison, why don't you take it away?
Hey everyone, so I'm Addison, and I graduated Sacred Heart, as you can see, in 2017. I was also an English major. After Sacred Heart, I went on to grad school right away. So I didn't go into the Peace Corps straight out of undergrad. I actually took 2 years in between, and then went to pursue Peace Corps after that. And my graduate degree was in higher education and student affairs. So for me, going into the Peace Corps, I had known Kieran and Adiel, who were both on the panel with us. I had known that they had participated in the Peace Corps before me. So that was kind of an idea already in my head. But what actually really prompted me was I was a graduate assistant at my graduate school, and the previous graduate assistant of my office also went into the Peace Corps after she graduated. My supervisor also, she interviewed for the Peace Corps and with her husband. The only reason why she didn't go into the Peace Corps was because her husband ended up backing out. So there's kind of that legacy for me and that kind of a little bit of pressure, if you will, to kind of keep that legacy going. So that's how I kind of fell into Peace Corps. And when I was looking through the programs and trying to learn about Peace Corps myself, I found that there was an education sector in China, and also in that role, I would be teaching, or the volunteer would be teaching Chinese at a university. So for me, being an English teacher, also having studied in higher education from a graduate program, that kind of, that all of my interests kind of fell into one place by teaching English in China at the college level. So in the first picture on the top left, you can see that's myself and some of my peers in my cohort. We were that was during the summer where we were training and learning about the language and learning about the culture. And so our training was about 3 months. Following the training on the bottom picture, that's when we got sworn in. So that's all of the Peace Corps volunteers in China for the 25th cohort. And we're all wearing traditional Chinese garments, traditional celebratory garments. So what was really neat was during our training time, uh, Peace Corps actually had these people come to us and take our measurements. So we actually had personalized and measured chi paos for the women, and then tongzhuan for the men, which was really neat. And so you can see that us all there. And then on the top right picture, that was taken about the first week of January. That took place during the Chinese New Year's. And so Chinese New Year in China is a combination of Christmas, New Year's in the States, as well as Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of food, there's a lot of celebration. Families are always going back to where they grew up and always spending time together. So the dean of the English department, he's the one taking the picture. He had brought myself and another Peace Corps volunteer to one of his family friends. And so all of us, we had a very nice New Year's dinner. We all celebrated together. The gentleman on the left, he was the cook. And so when we got there, probably around 4 or 5 p.m., he was cooking all day up until when we started eating around 8 p.m. It was a feast of about, I think it was 21 dishes. So it was incredible. And I actually, for the first time, I tried turtle and turtle egg during that dinner. So that was my experience. And I had joined only in 2019. So I recently just joined the Peace Corps. And then, of course, with the evacuation, with the pandemic starting in China, China was the earliest country that was evacuated back to the United States.
Awesome. Thank you, Addison. I'm smelling all those dishes now, and I wish I was there to have to participate in that. So thanks for sharing a little bit about that. We'll hear more from Addison later on today as well. Next, Kieran, if you want to tell us a little bit about these photos and what brought you to Peace Corps.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Addison, Nadiel, and everyone else for joining. So I'm Kieran. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, as you can see, from 2018 to 2020, up until coronavirus. I graduated Sacred Heart with a bachelor's in social work in 2016, and my journey with Peace Corps was definitely a little wavy in terms of how I got there. So I first learned about Peace Corps when I was younger, just kind of always being involved with like volunteer work. That was a great source of like community for me growing up. And in college, I did some volunteer projects actually with ADIL in Guatemala. And we had our professor and director of volunteer programs, who was a returned Peace Corps volunteer. So I kind of already had that idea brewing in my head. And after Sacred Heart, I actually applied twice and hadn't gotten an invitation to serve. And I took some time back to kind of reflect on my applications and my motivations for volunteering. And I came across a volunteer opportunity in Solomon Islands. And in the Solomon Islands, I went to a place called Kennedy Island, which is where John F. Kennedy was stranded during World War II and saved his fellow crewmates. And it's kind of in that moment when I decided to reapply again. And at last, I got an invitation to serve from Ukraine, and eventually went along with my Peace Corps service. So again, I was a education sector volunteer. So my primary function was teaching English, but also training teachers, Ukrainian teachers, for this next education reform that was going on in Ukraine at the time, which is kind of transitioning away from the Soviet style of teaching towards a more Western inclusive style of teaching, which I was very grateful to be a part of. So I'll start with the bottom left. That picture was taken at swearing in. We had 3 months of training where we were all placed in communities kind of close by to where our Peace Corps office was. And we would spend time on like 4 hours a day on language and 4 hours on technical training. So for me, education. And that photo was taken at a conference hall where we got sworn in by the ambassador, which is a very cool experience. Then we went to our communities, and The center photo with everyone sitting down, that is my community. Those are the English teachers and the director of the school that I served in. And on the left, the gentleman is the Peace Corps Ukraine country director. We had him, he wanted to come to my community to just kind of like show face and speak more about Peace Corps. And it was a really, really great honor for my community. We were really grateful for his visit, and it was a really just beautiful day. The bottom right is kind of like a photo of everyday life, I guess, at school. But this was actually like a sports day type of thing, and they really encouraged me to have like involvement with like the field day activities, which is always kind of fun. But the energy at school was always just a beautiful thing. And then the photo on the bottom of me taking the polar plunge. So that was a community tradition, a Ukrainian tradition from Ukrainian Orthodox. So what Ukrainians do to celebrate the baptism of Christ, they all kind of replicate the baptism by going to a body of water and dunking their heads 3 times. So I, of course, wanted to take part of that with that. And yeah, it was 29 degrees that day, but it was honestly such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I think a lot of folks got a lot of enjoyment from that. But yeah, it was a really cool experience that I wouldn't have ever gotten the chance to do. And then top right is, so the Peace Corps has a tradition, I think most posts do this, but definitely Ukraine has a tradition where when you complete your service, you go to the bell to ring the bell, and that kind of marks the end of your service. And while I was there, I was the warden, which means like you're kind of like the point person volunteer for the evacuation protocol. And being in Ukraine, we had a lot going on, being in a country that is currently in conflict with Russia in the east and tumultuous political arena. You know, the threat of evacuation was always kind of like in the back of most volunteers' heads, and especially with the security team for our post. But lo and behold, completely different situation with coronavirus. So that photo was taken at the completion of service right before we got evacuated. And yeah, I really look back in my service as something that was really productive. I learned a lot about myself, my community, and really like our goals as an agency abroad. And I'm always grateful for it, and I will love these memories forever. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kieran. I appreciate you sharing that as well. And I've also known lots of folks that have served in Ukraine and have had wonderful things to say about it. A really interesting geopolitical situation as well. So thanks for sharing that as well. Adiel, I think you are next. If you want to introduce yourself and walk us through some of your photos and talk about your service.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here as well. I think this has been really interesting so far because it seems like we've all joined the Peace Corps at different points in our careers. And it made me think of how in my cohort, at least, we had volunteers who joined right out of college like me, but we also had a couple volunteers who were retired. There was a retired accountant in my cohort who used to work for Boeing. We also had a retired biology teacher. So it seems like that the Peace Corps really wants like a diverse group of volunteers, which is great. So I graduated in 2017, and I ended up joining the Peace Corps almost immediately out of college. It was just a few months after I graduated that I had left. But throughout my time at Sacred Heart University, just like Kieran was saying, I was pretty involved with the Office of Volunteer Programs and Service Learning. Went to Guatemala a few times, and Costa Rica. I did a few other programs. And I really enjoyed that aspect of being abroad, and really enjoyed that learning experience. And just like many seniors, towards the end of my senior year, I was kind of thinking of what the next step would be for me. And there's a little uncertainty there in terms of what would the best step be for me professionally. I knew I had a strong interest in education. I really wanted something where I could potentially learn a new language. I really wanted also a leadership role. Also, I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. there is no good Zoom meeting without a dog in the background. But so I thought that would be the Peace Corps for me. Like Kieran said, one of our professors, he was a former director of the Office of Volunteer Programs and Service Learning. He was a former Peace Corps volunteer. And there are a few other professors who I saw as mentors, and they kind of encouraged me to kind of take this as the next step. So I applied towards the end of my senior year, specifically to Kosovo. That was one of the countries that I applied to. And I was very happy to see that I was being offered to serve as a primary school education volunteer. So I taught from kindergarten to 8th grade English, and I was Kosovo is a majority Albanian country, but similar to Ukraine, it's a very interesting geopolitical situation. But I served in a Serbian minority village, and at the time, Kosovo was the Peace Corps' newest post. So I was only the second volunteer to serve in my village. So when I arrived to my village, it was very much a new concept to the people there. They didn't really know many of the folks didn't know exactly what I was doing there, or they were unfamiliar with who I was. It takes several years, I think, and several rounds of volunteers to really have the community become familiar with what the Peace Corps is. So that was a huge part of my experience. They're just kind of explaining why I'm here, what the Peace Corps is, what do I do, and what our purpose is. So with a few of these photos here, as far as secondary projects go, I also had an English club for some of my students, and that's on the top left. On the top right, that was one of my counterparts. So my village actually had 3 English teachers, and I would teach alongside all 3 of them during class. And throughout service, there's several professional development opportunities, not just for you, but also for the people that you work with. So we had a project design and management conference in Kosovo, and you have the opportunity to invite your counterpart to kind of spark that collaborative approach to your work. And if they complete the training, your counterpart gets a certificate from the Peace Corps as well. From the bottom left, so every country has a different housing policy. I lived with a host family for both years of my service, and my family, they were farmers. So often after school, I would kind of help them in the field there. And the picture on the bottom left is just me kind of pumping water. And on the bottom right, another secondary project that I had was this robotics class that I had for my students. There were several NGOs in the area, and they were also all very collaborative. And as far as flexibility goes, just like what Michael was saying earlier, in the Peace Corps, you have the opportunity to kind of branch out and be creative with your approach, with how you want with what you want to do in service. So I found an organization that does robotics, and I thought that would be something that would be of interest to my students. So we were able to start something there as well. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Adil. I, again, also appreciate you sharing that. The photo with your counterpart and the certificate makes me smile, because it seems like, similar to my experience in Madagascar, and I'm sure many other return volunteers, everybody loves their certificate from Peace Corps. That piece of paper with a Peace Corps logo, and for a counterpart or for a community member to be certified that they participated in a training means a lot to folks. So it's nice to see both of your big smiles there and participating in that. So thanks for sharing. So I've got some other questions that I want to kind of throw to you guys as panelists, and maybe we can go through it kind of in the same order as Addison, Kieran, and ADL, and talk a little bit about some of your experiences, and then we will probably have time at the end for some Q&A from our audience members. So if any of you are thinking about questions you'd like to ask our panelists, put them in the chat now if you want to, but later on I'll address them and have an opportunity to unmute yourselves as well. But one of the big questions I wanted to ask all of you is, tying your experience from Sacred Heart into your Peace Corps experience, how do you think that impacted your service or informed your service? I know several of you talked about being inspired by, former professors at Sacred Heart. So if you'd like to elaborate on any of that or talk about anything different, Addison, if you'd like to kick us off with your thoughts on how Sacred Heart impacted your service.
So I think to start with, I would say at Sacred Heart for myself, there was a lot of opportunity to be involved. But a lot of that opportunity also came to how proactive you were as a student in order to find that involvement. And I think that translates very well to the Peace Corps because, of course, you're involving yourself with the community abroad, but also the amount of involvement you have, the experiences you share with all those individuals is also going to be determined by how much you are willing to invest for yourself and also for the community around you. So I'd say that active engagement while at SHU was something that really kind of stuck with me, that proactiveness. Beyond that, my volunteer experience at SHU, a lot of it revolved around campus ministry and so service in that aspect. So I would say just by being involved in campus ministry, of course, at Sacred Heart has a working relationship with volunteer programs. So really just having that community in a kind of passive way, I was able to absorb or observe different things other folks, such as Adiel and Kieran participated in, or what the offices would do themselves, and really just understanding the value of service in that sense, the impact versus the intention of something someone does. I would say also is something that kind of shaped my perspective in service during the Peace Corps.
Thanks, Addison. Kieran, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I think Addison did a very, very good job of explaining. So just to kind of echo that, for me, I think coming into Sacred Heart, so I actually transferred into SHU, and I think something that stood out when I was making a decision on which direction to go in, Sacred Heart seemed pretty unmatched when it came to the amount of volunteer opportunities and volunteer values that they instill in their student body. So when I came to Sacred Heart, that was something I instantly tried to get involved in, and you don't have to look far. I think in most organizations on campus, volunteerism is kind of weaved into that. So, I think that's something that Sacred Heart does a very, very good job on. And their volunteer programs, again, like echoes all of these values, both domestic and abroad. So realistically, I think it helped prepare me to become a better Peace Corps volunteer. And it really opened my eyes into like what volunteerism should look like and what you can gain from it, but also how you can effectively become a good Peace Corps volunteer with good values that benefit everybody. So yeah, again, I think Sacred Heart does a very, very good job with that.
Wonderful. Adiel, anything you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think Sacred Heart definitely just kind of prides itself in the amount of community service hours that it puts in the Bridgeport community, abroad. I mean, if I reflect back, I remember our athletes really doing a lot of community service, student government. There are several pre-fall programs for incoming freshmen. So every year, I would just try to look out for different opportunities for me to become involved, specifically in volunteer service. And on top of that, I mean, I was a global studies major, so I really kind of had this mindset that I wanted to go abroad. And like you said earlier, Michael, our professors kind of encourage that.
Yeah, that's awesome. The kind of understanding this bridge between your collegiate experience and your Peace Corps experience, I think is really helpful for a lot of people to hear and to understand the paths that you all have taken. They've been slightly different, but have led you to this similar experience, which is pretty incredible. I'm also curious, and maybe we can kind of go in reverse order of our panel now, change things up a little bit. So we'll start with you, Adiel. Talk a little bit about, how your Peace Corps service has actually impacted your career or your academic endeavors after your service.
Yeah, so in the Peace Corps, like I said, there are several professional development opportunities The Peace Corps has several conferences for you, your counterparts, and also in the Peace Corps, you have opportunities to get involved with certain areas that relate to different careers like grant writing. My post worked pretty collaboratively with the U.S. Agency for International Development. So there, and also with the embassy. So, and you have opportunities, and the Peace Corps does a pretty good job with creating opportunities for you to meet other folks who work in government. So like the Foreign Service or other folks at USAID. For me, I had a pretty strong interest in education, and I knew I wanted to be in the DC area eventually and kind of work in government. I had a strong interest in public service. But after Peace Corps service, I decided to apply for a Fulbright grant to Serbia because I was in a minority Serbian village, and I thought I was having a pretty interesting experience being in a majority Albanian country. I applied to Fulbright Serbia, and I had received the Fulbright grant to teach at a university in northern Serbia, continuing with English. And that lasted for about 6 months. It got cut short due to COVID, but Fulbright was a really good next step for me in terms of like a career in education. And I still had, though, because that Fulbright grant was also only about 6 months long, I still had my active Peace Corps non-competitive eligibility status that Michael mentioned earlier. And Fulbright also gives you NCE status for a year. But I really wanted to use that NCE status when I was to apply for government jobs. So with the goal of just trying to be in the DC area and have a career in government, I applied to the Department of Education. Peace Corps has a pretty good website of opportunities of both public sector and private sector opportunities. And I mean, Michael can speak about this much better than I can, but these are opportunities specifically that are looking for Peace Corps volunteers, some with only NCE status. So I applied to a job at the Department of Ed with the Office of School Support and Accountability with my NCE status. And I heard back fairly quickly. From what I understand, like federal employers really look out for NCE status if the applicant has it. So I mean, I would suggest to anybody that you really take advantage of that if you have it. I recently moved to Arlington, Virginia a few months ago, and like I said, I work on a team that implements Title I funding from the Every Student Succeeds Act. And yeah, so it's been like starting with Peace Corps service, it's been a pretty good kind of way to work my way up.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Kieran, can you talk a little bit about what your life after service has been?
Yeah, I think very similar to Adil in the regards of being involved in like public service and civic service. For me, I think Peace Corps really opened up so many doors for me, given the fact that Peace Corps Ukraine as a post is really well organized, and they do a very good job of giving volunteers a lot of opportunities to learn different things and learn about and work with different organizations that are currently in Ukraine, specifically like USAID and the embassy, similar to Adil, how he mentioned that, and other nonprofits that service different parts of the country. So yeah, for me, after we got evacuated for coronavirus, you know, being reintegrating into, you know, back home to America while the pandemic is at its peak, and trying to figure out next steps, you know, the non-competitive eligibility really came in handy. And subsequently, I got a job offer from the Social Security Administration, and I moved up to Montpelier, Vermont. And I really think without my Peace Corps experience and non-competitive eligibility, it would be a very different conversation. But luckily, I did find a landing spot, and down the road, I'm really hoping to, you know, keep building on federal service and stay within the federal government. So yeah, I think without Peace Corps, like it's not really possible, and they have a lot of good resources and opportunities that return Peace Corps volunteers take advantage of, then I think it's a great thing.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Addison, what about you?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that after undergrad, I went directly into grad school. And so again, my grad program was for higher education and student affairs. So during undergrad, I really thought, oh, you know what, I want to work in college for the rest of my life, and that would be my way to serve, so to speak, right? Serving students. I would say beyond the resources that, you know, ADL and Kieran mentioned, the technical resources, one resource from the Peace Corps, I would say, would just be the other individuals that are part of Peace Corps, right? So in my cohort, I had folks of all different majors from all around the United States. I had folks from Harvard, Cornell, Tufts. So that's when I knew I really made it, because I was, you know, neck and neck with them. But just being around these individuals and hearing their stories, hearing their interests, and really learning for myself what other things there are to pursue, what other things there are in the world. And, you know, speaking of other things in the world, even being in China, right? Being Chinese American myself, I thought I had a really great handle on what it means to be American and what it means to be Chinese and how to balance those cultures. But being in the country itself and being immersed and surrounded by it, I think a lot of, at least my perspective going in, you're right, we there's an understanding of, you know, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, really huge international hubs. Where I was, it was nothing like that. The disparity between cities and the countryside is huge, both economically, socially. I was with a huge Muslim population. My students, just one more example, my students who I would have in class, they would wear one outfit for that entire week and rotate between two outfits, you know, throughout the month. So just seeing all of these ideas and experiences that I had no idea even existed, that kind of garnered me to realize, all right, you know, maybe there is something outside of higher education. Maybe there is something outside of this initial career path I had intentionally intended for myself. And so that's how I got more interested in the government. That's how I got more interested in public service. One thing I will add, in addition to non-competitive eligibility being available for the public and private sectors, there's also nonprofits as well. That is an option for Peace Corps volunteers to pursue. So with all of that, I did also use non-competitive eligibility. And recently I was offered a position in the Environmental Protection Agency. So I'll be pursuing that, pending my background check. Hopefully nothing goes wrong, but I'll be pursuing that and hopefully moving down to where Kieran and ADL are in the near future.
Awesome. Yeah. So I don't know if you're all sensing a theme here, but this non-competitive eligibility is no joke. This is a huge benefit, something that folks really look out for. Again, if federal service is at all interesting to you, or, you know, looking into some of those options, definitely a great benefit to take advantage of. And I appreciate you all sharing your experiences after Peace Corps service as well. Before we kind of get into my last question, I did want to pause and take a chance if there are anybody out there that has questions from the audience. Again, feel free to type them into the chat, or we're a relatively small group. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, but I'll pause here for a moment if any of our audience members have a question for our panelists.
So I just wanted to throw a question out there for the panelists. I know a question that often comes up with a lot of our students is what their timeline for application should look like. When should they start preparing? Who should they meet with? Drafts of application, obviously it's not something that you pull together overnight. So what might you recommend in terms of that long-term application process?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Annie, and that's actually going to be my very last point in the last few minutes before we wrap up. So I promise I will get to that. Short answer is I'm your guy, I'm your recruiter, so feel free to reach out to me. But thank you for that question. We had a question come in the chat as well, which I think would be really cool for our panelists to talk about. The question is, I'd be curious to know what the single most memorable experience was during your time abroad. And I know it might be hard to pick just one experience, but if our panelists want to go around in any particular order and share a pretty memorable experience you have.
I think it is hard to kind of pick out one single experience, like over the course of 2 years of service, plus the 3 months of training that you go through. I'd say for me, it would be one of my secondary projects. So even though I taught K through 8, there weren't really any after school programs for my students, especially during the summer. During the summer, you know, I was in a pretty small village, so a lot of the kids would be on the street, not really doing much. But I really wanted to find a way for the kids to kind of continue their learning outside of the classroom at a summer camp. So like I said, my post kind of works collaboratively with USAID in terms of grants. So Peace Corps has different grant opportunities for volunteers. So I applied for a small grant in collaboration with my school, with different teachers and also parents to kind of schedule a 1 week long summer camp for my kids, to kind of organize transportation to get them out of the village and see different areas of Kosovo, that robotics class, some other different elements that parents can and other teachers can contribute to. So that grant ended up being approved, and that 1 week camp ended up becoming pretty successful. So that would be like a pretty big highlight of my own service.
Yeah, I can add in. So I think there's so many to choose from, really, and you know, some that stick out are like swearing in, just like the ceremonies and all of that stuff. But I think for me, one of my most like treasured memories was a summer camp that Peace Corps put on. So in Ukraine, we're very involved with PEPFAR, which is the Presidential Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and Ukraine actually has the second highest infectivity rate of HIV. And one of the Peace Corps volunteers put on a camp in a really beautiful part of the country, and it invited students from ages like 11 to 17 to come to the camp, and it was about 100 campers. And being in Ukraine, moving away from, again, like I had mentioned, a Soviet style of society, inclusivity is a very big challenge for a lot of Ukrainian students. And you know, this camp, again, the way we designed it with our values, we made sure it was a very like safe environment for students to express their ideas and be comfortable with themselves, and also discuss other topics related to HIV, such as destigmatization. And the camp as a whole was a great success, and I think singular moment was kind of it wasn't really a singular moment, but it was sprinkled throughout the 2 weeks of the camp, and it was really centered around like just seeing students finally being like comfortable in their own skin, which is a beautiful thing, and hearing their feedback about how this camp finally gave them a voice and a comfort space, and meeting folks who are exactly like themselves. And it was a really powerful thing. So I think that's something I'll always look back on.
I'm going to take this question a little bit differently. So for myself, a lot of my time was spent with students, whether it was teaching them in class, tutoring them outside of the classroom, or having meals with them, right, for dinner, for lunch and whatnot. So a lot of that time was spent building those relationships. And so at least for me, I find that, you know, when I went to the Peace Corps, when I kind of do any service work, I'm in the back of my mind, I'm hoping like, man, I really want to make an impact. I really hope like I can change someone's life, right, for lack of a better term. So after we were evacuated from China, several months afterwards, probably around beginning of the summer, some students had contacted me. And so they were asking, hey, you know, Mr. Chow, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying safe. Make sure you wear a mask when you go outside. Make sure you're washing your hands. Some other students I had tutored said like, hey, I passed this test, so thank you so much for tutoring me. And so it was really that experience of them reaching out and taking interest in what I'm doing, but also wanting to share what they were doing and like how their lives were progressing. I would say would be the my favorite experience so far, because for me that was just very gratifying to hear, very rewarding to hear, to know that uh, you know, this, by being in the Peace Corps, because at times, you know, it does get very you do get very bogged down with work and the realities of, you know, living in another country and having to navigate, you know, all these different things, and can sometimes get burdensome. But to know that even throughout that, those burdens, even throughout the sometimes difficulties, I was able to build that relationship with these students, and have them, you know, have that relationship really be exemplified through them finding a means to reach out to me and still have a conversation with me, really meant a lot. So I'd say that would be my favorite experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate those reflections and those memories, and thank you for that question as well. With the last few minutes that we have here, I do want to make sure I have some time to cover a little bit about the application as well. But our last question for the panelists that I've had prepared, if we could, you know, talk a little bit about your advice for other people who are considering Peace Corps. And for the impact of time, I don't mean to be too rude, but we'll try to keep this to maybe 1 or 2 sentences and give us, you know, somebody who's sitting here thinking about Peace Corps, what is your advice for them? And we can go in any order.
I can start. My advice is really have an open mind. Like put yourself out there and you know, try new things and learn new skills, especially if you have the time on your hand. And I think that'll really, really go a long way. And I think it's a good habit to build throughout your life, but it'll definitely apply when you're considering Peace Corps. So yeah, and I think SHU is a great place to do that. So have an open mind.
Any other nuggets of advice out there? Sorry, go ahead.
One of my biggest hesitancies was being at an age where a lot of my friends were getting married and engaged and having children. So I was afraid of missing those life moments and being away. The piece of advice that was given to me was just do it. Because although you may be seeing people's lives kind of pass by and seeing those experiences go, other people will be looking at your own experiences and seeing what you're doing. So it's not just a one-way kind of street as far as life passing by. You're also going to go through life by yourself, and you're also going to have those experiences that other people won't be able to kind of experience by being in the United States. So the advice is just go for it.
I think the only thing I would add is to really, like, you don't have to rush into it. Like I said, in my cohort, we had really young volunteers and we had volunteers who were retired. And there are also some volunteers who are kind of in the middle of their career. So the Peace Corps is something that you don't have to do immediately after college. If you think you can contribute to the Peace Corps better by working for a few years first, that's also something that would be very valid. So, you know, even if you're unsure of doing it now, it might be something that you could do later in your life.
All beautiful nuggets of advice. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your opinions and sharing your stories as well today. It's a really special opportunity that we have to be able to hear that. So thank you for that. With the last few minutes, I did want to wrap up and address Annie's question and talk to you all a little bit about the application process. I know there's a lot going on this slide, so hopefully you're not too overwhelmed. Essentially, this is a really broad look at our application process overall. You're all right now at step one. You're browsing, you're getting information, you're considering Peace Corps. You know who your recruiter is now. Hello. So you can continue to work with me if you have questions. But really steps 2 through 8 here that you see, this is the application process that we're really talking about. The timeline for this generally, from the time you apply online to the time you get to step 8 and get on the plane to depart, that takes anywhere from 9 to 12 months typically. I would imagine that in today's world of COVID, it's probably going to be a little closer to that 12-month range. So my general advice to folks that I work with is think about when you would actually be ready to get on that plane and depart, and work backwards about a year from that point. And that's really essentially the time that you need to be making some actionable steps on your application. The application is all online. Still going back to step 2 here, it's all online. We're going to ask for a resume and a motivation statement, which is basically a 500-word essay. Those are 2 things that as your recruiter, I can help you with. I can review your resume. I can help give you some tips and some templates. So definitely feel free to reach out to me for those resources. The rest of the application process is pretty self-explanatory. It happens, over several months. So this is definitely a process. You're never going to get an email one day and say, pack your bags, you're going to China next week. That's not how this works. So definitely, you want to be prepared. But again, as your local recruiter, I'm here to help walk you through this process. So here's all my contact information. Again, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. Connect with me on social media. I am your go-to person for Sacred Heart. So if you've got questions, if you've got considerations, I'm happy to schedule some time to chat with you one-on-one about that. And hopefully we'll be able to see you for future events as well. Again, please join me in thanking our panelists for joining us and for sharing their experiences and for sharing their stories and their photos. I really hope it was helpful for all of you, and at the very least interesting, and just hopefully a glance at what life can look like after Sacred Heart as well, with Peace Corps as an option. So again, I appreciate everybody for taking the time to join me this afternoon. Thank you so much. If you've got other questions, feel free to reach out to me. But after that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a lovely weekend. Hopefully we'll be able to speak again real soon. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you, Michael, for your time as well.